Hello and welcome to Just Have a Think. In last week's programme I put extreme fossil fuels on our WTF board as it became absolutely clear that North American banks were ramping up their investments in tar sands, which are also known as oil sands. They're really not something we've got much exposure to or knowledge of over here in the UK, so I was intrigued to find out what all the fuss was about over there in Canada and the US. And my goodness, what a Pandora's box was opened when I started to research the subject. The benefit of people on this side of the pond, Alberta is a region of Canada that's got vast reserves of bituminous oil. In fact, it's got the very dubious privilege of being located right on top of about 2 trillion barrels worth. The only slight snag for our dear friends in the fossil fuel industry is that most of the gloop is so deep that it's not accessible, so the actual available resource is only about 168 billion barrels, which still makes it the third largest site in the world, just behind Saudi Arabia and Venezuela. They really have screwed that up in Venezuela, haven't they? Alberta's fossil fuel bonanza doesn't exist as a nice neat seam of crude oil in the ground ready to be pumped out. It actually exists as a thick bituminous sandy sludge that requires an entirely different and much more energy intensive method of extraction. Here's how it works. Bitumen is almost solid at room temperature, so it doesn't flow like normal oil. It has to be either heated with steam or diluted with other lighter hydrocarbons or broken down with solvents. If it's more than 75 metres below the ground, then the most common method of extraction is to pump massive volumes of steam down into the seam at huge pressure to heat up the bitumen to a temperature where it will flow back up a recovery pipe to ground level. If it's more or less at ground level already, then it's obtained by open mining. The gunky sand is scooped up with massive diggers and transported in these 400-ton dump trucks to a processing plant where colossal amounts of hot water are used to separate the bitumen from the sand and the other impurities. The water is used again and again in the system, something the tar sands industry refer to as recycling. Technically correct, I guess, but not quite in the spirit of recycling as you and I know it. 95% of the water used becomes so polluted that it has to be stored in toxic pits called tailing ponds. And that water's got all sorts of salts and bitumen and solvents in it, so it's pretty nasty. In fact, the largest extraction company, Crude, was fined $3 million Canadian in 2010 after 1,600 birds landed on one of its tailing ponds in 2008 and died as a result of the toxins and oil. Every year, about 4 billion litres of this contaminated water leaks out of these pits into the surrounding waterways and forests. The open mining process itself dislodges an awful lot of earth, which the mining companies tell us is stored carefully and used to reclaim the mined land back to nature once they finish with it.
As per its name, Vince and his team have put the bitumen extraction plant right in the mine pit. We dig the hole, we process what's being mined in that hole right in the pit. We move forward. We fill up the hole behind us as we go forward. So the period of time from mining to reclamation is basically immediate.
But nevertheless, by 2013, after 46 years of production, only 0.15% of the land used for tar sands extraction had been certified as reclaimed. As well as the localised environmental car crash that this process causes, which has also been linked to some very rare types of cancer and other ailments in disproportionate numbers amongst the indigenous population who have to drink this contaminated water, the tar sands process also uses huge amounts of energy to heat the water as part of the extraction process, energy which is usually provided by burning natural gas. The result of that is that tar sands production produces 3 to 4 times more greenhouse gases than normal oil production. In fact, carbon emissions from tar sands production tripled between 2003 and 2013, at which point Canada's climate performance was rated as the worst in the entire Western world. Once it's been transformed into something that will actually flow through a pipe, the bitumen, which at this stage of the process is now referred to as synthetic crude oil, hence the name of Syncrude, is pumped down into the United States through huge pipelines to refineries on the Gulf Coast. For over a decade, TransCanada Corporation has been trying to get permission to run the Keystone XL extension to create a more direct path between 2 points on the existing Keystone pipeline between Alberta Sands and Steel City in Nebraska. In 2015, following years of research and debate, President Obama blocked the pipeline extension.
Decided that the Keystone XL pipeline would not serve the national interests of the United States.
But of course, as we all know, the new administration reversed that carefully considered decision with one flourish of an overly flamboyant presidential felt tip. You know, the type your kids use for colouring in at school. The only state in America that had still not approved the pipeline at that stage was, unsurprisingly, Nebraska. Again, for the benefit of us Brits, Nebraska is a mostly agricultural state, famous for faith, farming and football. Apparently they have a very good group of young men called the Huskers who partake in something called American football. It's not football though, is it? There's a clue. Ironically, the Huskers' offensive line is actually called the pipeline, but I'm pretty sure it's nothing to do with TransCanada or Keystone. Nebraska's also famous for a vast tract of land called the Sandhills, which covers about 25% of the state. TransCanada's plan was to drive the Keystone XL extension straight through this land, but underneath the Sandhills there's an enormous reservoir that supplies water to about a third of the continental United States. Now, pipelines leak, they just do. They all do to some extent, and the longer they are, the more likely they are to leak. And in November 2017, 210,000 gallons leaked out of the existing Keystone pipeline. So if the new pipeline does get consent to go across the Nebraska Sandhills, when it leaks, it'll have the potential consequence of contaminating a water table that supplies water to many millions of American people. But when the Nebraska Public Service Commission finally signed an agreement back in November 2017 to allow the pipeline across their state, they made something of a surprise decision. They didn't opt for TransCanada's preferred route across the Sandhills and through some Indigenous people's sacred lands. Instead, they approved a route that would take the pipeline over an entirely different part of the state, an area that TransCanada hadn't even studied, and that means TransCanada will have to pretty much start over again to get 400 additional easements or land rights in place before they can go ahead with this new route. When the Keystone XL project first came about around 10 years ago, it was budgeted for about $5 billion. All the lobbying and counter-campaigning over the years has pushed that up to about $8 billion. This Nebraska ruling is reckoned to be adding about another $1 billion to TransCanada's money pit. So this new route looks like it's significantly less attractive to TransCanada, who've said that they will now need to take some time to fully assess the ruling. At the same time, there are also several lawsuits in progress from various groups, including First Nation Indigenous peoples,
continue to fight the Keystone route,
whose sacred lands are most at threat from this industry.
For our land, for future generations.
The combination of these factors means it's actually pretty unlikely that the XL pipeline will come into existence anytime soon, maybe not even within the next 10 years, by which time the political climate, as well as the actual climate, may well have changed significantly. On top of that, the exponential advancement of renewable energy sources around the world may by then have made the entire project economically unviable. In the meantime though, what can we individual citizens do to make our voice heard on issues like the Keystone XL pipeline and other industries that continue to pump CO2 into our atmosphere? Well, here's a few suggestions. Number 1, whether you're in the UK, North America or anywhere else in the world, if you're concerned about these issues, then you can sign up to organisations like 350.org, who are leading the way in coordinating collective action to curtail the worst excesses of the fossil fuel industries. Number 2, don't buy another internal combustion engine car ever again. Just have a think about that concept. The next time you come to renew your vehicle, buy an electric model. They're really not just for Californian hipsters and tree-hugging weirdos anymore. The infrastructure, both in North America and Europe, coupled with advances in battery technology that allow ranges of over 300 miles in some models, means that nowadays they're a completely viable and financially competitive alternative to the gas guzzlers. We'll definitely be looking at the huge selection of electric cars available in 2018 and the charging networks a little later in the year. Number 3, switch to a green energy supplier, and better still, get solar panels on your home. Number 4, subscribe to websites like Ethical Consumer that give daily and weekly advice on how to shop in an environmentally sustainable way. Number 5, stop eating meat. Do what? You can Yeah, I know, it's mental, it's completely mental. How can any self-respecting human being possibly make it through life without devouring part of a dead animal on a regular basis? And that was exactly my view for the first 48 years of my existence on this planet. But I'm bound to tell you that I switched to a vegetarian diet at the start of this year, and actually now I've also removed all dairy products from my diet as well. And I have to say, I've genuinely never felt more healthy. Now I know this is a big red line for a lot of people, especially you folks over there in the States, where it appears to be a legal requirement for every citizen to eat at least a side of beef per week. So I won't dwell on it at this stage, but we will come back to it more and more over the coming months as I learn more and more about the environmental benefits of cutting meat out of your diet, and also how to assimilate a meat and dairy-free diet into an everyday lifestyle. Number 6, hassle your local representative. If you're in the States, then you've got the perfect opportunity with the midterm elections coming up to get in touch with your local representative to express your views and ask them what they've been doing for your area when it comes to the environment and sustainability and why they deserve your vote. I know it's tempted to think they're all bought and paid for, and a couple of you have actually said as much in the comments section of this channel, but they still need your vote to get re-elected, so if enough people get active, they do eventually start responding. It is an uphill struggle, especially in what's now being referred to as Trump's America, but that's exactly what the fossil fuel industries want you to think. If you give up and do nothing, then nothing will change. As Albert Einstein once said, if I was to remain silent, then I'd be guilty of complicity. So there we go, a nice light and cheery one for you this week. I'll put links to loads of websites in the description box below where you can delve more deeply into the subject and find out how to make your voice heard. I know this one's a bit contentious, but I do value your comments and feedback, regardless of which way you view the argument. So please do leave your views in the comments section below. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell if you haven't already done so, and share the link with all your friends if you can. As always, thank you very much for watching, have a great week, and remember to just have a think. See you next week.